Picture this. It's April 19th, 2010. You're a sea turtle, just vibing in the Gulf of Mexico, living your best life. The water's nice, the fish are plentiful, and you've got exactly zero worries. You're thinking about maybe hitting up that coral reef later, catching some jellyfish. It's gonna be a great week. 24 hours later, your entire world is literally on fire. Welcome to the story of the Deepwater Horizon disaster. The oil spill so catastrophically massive, so mind-numbingly expensive, and so thoroughly avoidable that it makes every other corporate disaster look like a kid knocking over a juice box. We're talking about $100 billion oopsie-daisy. That's billion with a B. The kind of money where you could buy every single person in Louisiana a brand new Tesla and still have enough left over to fund a small country's military. But here's the kicker, and I mean the real gut punch. It's still killing marine life today. 14 years later, we're in 2024, and dolphins in the Gulf are still dying with lesions that trace back to this disaster. Baby fish are still being born with deformities. The ocean floor is still toxic. This isn't just a story about an oil spill. This is a story about what happens when corporations decide that safety regulations are more like safety suggestions. When profit over people becomes profit over literally everything, including the planet. So buckle up, because we're about to dive deep, pun absolutely intended, into how BP, Transocean, and Halliburton managed to create an environmental catastrophe so epic that Mother Nature herself probably filed a restraining order. And trust me, by the end of this, you're gonna be so angry you'll want to never use petroleum products again. Spoiler alert, you probably can't, because we've built our entire civilization around them. Isn't capitalism fun? Before we get to the main event, the explosion that turned the Gulf of Mexico into the world's most expensive barbecue, we need to talk about British Petroleum, or as they rebranded in 2000, just BP. Oh, and that rebrand? They spent $200 million on it. That's right, $200 million to change their name and slap on a new logo that looks like a sun made of flowers. They called it Beyond Petroleum. You know, because nothing says we care about the environment like spending the GDP of a small nation on graphic design while your actual petroleum business continues to extract fossil fuels from every corner of the planet. It's like if McDonald's rebranded as Beyond Burgers, but still served Big Macs, which, now that I think about it, they kind of did with their salad menu. But I digress. Let's rewind to 2005. 5 years before Deepwater Horizon. BP owned a refinery in Texas City, Texas. On March 23, 2005, that refinery exploded. 15 workers died, over 180 were injured. The cause? BP had cut maintenance budgets. They had ignored safety warnings. Alarms that should have been working weren't working. It was like a checklist of how to create an industrial disaster 101. The U.S. Chemical Safety Board investigation found that BP had known about safety problems for years, but fixing them would have cost money, and money is for quarterly earnings reports, not for silly things like keeping your employees alive. BP got fined $21 million. That's million with an M. For comparison, BP's profit in 2005 was $22.3 billion. So that fine was literally 0.09% of their annual profit. That's like someone making $50,000 a year getting fined $45. Great deterrent, guys. I'm sure they learned their lesson. And they definitely learned their lesson. Actually, no, they didn't. Because in 2006, BP had a major pipeline leak in Alaska's Prudhoe Bay. 267,000 gallons of crude oil spilled onto the Alaskan tundra. Why? Because BP had been skipping pipeline maintenance. See a pattern forming here? The investigation found that BP had known the pipeline was corroding. They'd been warned multiple times,
But inspections cost money, and why spend money on safety when you can spend it on marketing campaigns about how green you are? After Alaska, BP got hit with more fines. They paid up, promised to do better, and then kept doing exactly what they'd been doing. Because here's what corporations figured out a long time ago. Fines are just the cost of doing business. If you can make $10 billion cutting corners and you get fined $100 million when you get caught, you still net $9.9 billion. That's not punishment, that's a discount. So by 2010, BP had established itself as the corporate equivalent of that friend who keeps saying, "I'll be more careful next time," right before they break your stuff again. But let's talk about offshore drilling for a second, because this is where it gets really spicy. Offshore drilling is inherently dangerous. You're drilling miles into the Earth's crust, underwater, extracting pressurized hydrocarbons that desperately want to escape. It's like performing surgery while skydiving. Technically possible, but one wrong move and everything goes catastrophically wrong. The Gulf of Mexico is basically the Saudi Arabia of offshore drilling. By 2010, there were over 3,500 offshore platforms in the Gulf. Deepwater drilling, that's drilling in water deeper than 1,000 feet, had become the new frontier. And here's where we meet our star of the show, the Deepwater Horizon. Look at her. Isn't she beautiful? 9 years old in 2010, built in South Korea, this semi-submersible drilling rig was the pride of Transocean's fleet. She cost $350 million to build. She was 400 feet long, and when she was drilling, she floated on giant pontoons in water over 5,000 feet deep. The Deepwater Horizon was technically owned by Transocean, but BP was leasing it for about $500,000 per day. That's $500,000 every single day, whether they were drilling or not. So naturally, BP was incentivized to drill as fast as possible. Time is money, and money is what shareholders care about. The well they were drilling was called Macondo. Cute name, right? Sounds like a Starbucks drink. I'll take a grande Macondo with extra foam. The Macondo well was ambitious. They were drilling almost 3 miles into the ocean floor, into a reservoir with crude oil under enormous pressure. The deeper you go, the more pressure you're dealing with. It's like opening a shaken champagne bottle, except instead of champagne, it's explosive hydrocarbons, and instead of a bottle, it's the earth itself. Throughout the drilling process, there were warning signs, kicks, sudden influxes of gas into the wellbore, losses of drilling fluid, equipment failures. Normal people would interpret these as signs to slow down, double-check everything, maybe take a safety beat. BP interpreted them as minor inconveniences that were cutting into their timeline. The well was behind schedule, it was over budget. BP executives were getting antsy. There were emails, we'll get to the emails, where BP managers were basically like, drill faster, spend less, ignore the problems. By April 20th, 2010, the Deepwater Horizon was 43 days behind schedule. At $500,000 a day, that's over $21 million in extra costs. BP wanted this well finished, cemented, capped, and producing oil yesterday. And that's how you get a disaster. Not through malice, but through a corporate culture that treats safety protocols like optional suggestions and views catastrophic risk as an acceptable trade-off for quarterly earnings. April 20th, 2010 was supposed to be a good day. They were finally finishing up the Macondo well. Just a few more procedures and they could move on. There was even a BP executive on board for a management visit. Spoiler alert, it was not a good day.
Let's set the scene. It's April 20th, 2010, around 9 p.m. Central Time. The Deepwater Horizon is lit up like a Christmas tree in the middle of the Gulf of Mexico, about 40 miles off the Louisiana coast. There are 126 people on board. Workers, managers, BP executives, Transocean crew. Some of them have been on the rig for weeks. They're tired. They want to go home. This well has been a pain in the ass for months, and they're so close to being done. The plan for the evening is to perform a negative pressure test. Catchy name, right?
Sounds like something from a high school chemistry class. Here's what it means. They're going to temporarily remove the heavy drilling mud from the well and replace it with lighter seawater. This simulates what the well will be like when it's finally capped. If the well can hold back the oil and gas pressure with just seawater, it means the cement barrier at the bottom is solid. If pressure starts building, that means there's a leak and you've got oil and gas trying to force their way up. It's basically a stress test for the well. And like any good stress test, if it fails, you need to stop everything and fix the problem. Guess what happened? The negative pressure test failed. Spectacularly. They ran the test and pressure started building where it shouldn't. This is the well equivalent of seeing smoke coming from under your car hood. Any rational person stops and investigates. But see, there was a problem. If they stopped and spent time troubleshooting, that would cost more money, more delays, more explaining to bosses why they're behind schedule. So they ran the test again, and it failed again. Let me repeat that. The safety test designed to tell you, hey, this well isn't safe, failed. Twice. The response? Let's just interpret the results differently. I'm not making this up. This came out in the investigation. Workers on the rig were confused by the test results. Pressure readings weren't making sense. But instead of following the protocol, which was, if confused, stop drilling and call the experts, they convinced themselves the readings were okay. This is what's called normalization of deviance. It's when you get so used to things going slightly wrong that you start accepting it as normal. The car makes a weird noise, but it still drives, so you ignore it. The check engine light comes on, but you've got places to be, so you keep driving. Except in this case, the check engine light was the Earth itself saying, I'm about to blow up. Around 9:30 p.m., they decided the test was fine. Green light, let's keep going. At 9:45 p.m., workers started replacing the heavy drilling mud with seawater. This is when things started accelerating toward disaster. The drilling mud wasn't just lubricant, it was the main thing keeping the well's enormous pressure contained. Swapping it for lighter seawater was like removing a cork from a shaken champagne bottle, except this champagne was under thousands of pounds of pressure and also flammable. At 9:49 p.m., the first signs of trouble appeared. Drilling mud started flowing up when it shouldn't. The pumps started behaving weird. At 9:55 p.m., there was a massive kick, a sudden surge of gas coming up the wellbore. And this is where we need to talk about the blowout preventer. The blowout preventer, or BOP, is the last line of defense against a well blowout. It's a massive piece of equipment sitting on the ocean floor right at the top of the well. If everything else fails, the BOP has powerful rams that can slam shut and seal the well completely. It can literally shear through the drill pipe and seal the well in an emergency. It's your safety net, your ejector seat, your break glass in case of emergency button. The Deepwater Horizon's BOP had been modified and maintained by Transocean. It had been inspected, kind of. Some of the inspections were incomplete. Some maintenance had been deferred, but it should still work, right? Right? At 9:56 p.m., as gas came surging up the pipe, someone hit the emergency activation for the BOP. Nothing happened. They tried again. Nothing. The blowout preventer, the one piece of equipment specifically designed to prevent blowouts, didn't work. Later investigations would find it had a dead battery. A pipe ram was mispositioned. The control systems were faulty. It was like discovering your fire extinguisher is full of gasoline right when your house catches fire. At 9:56 p.m., as gas came surging up the pipe, someone hit the emergency activation for the BOP. Nothing happened. They tried again. Nothing. The blowout preventer, the one piece of equipment specifically designed to prevent blowouts, didn't work. Later investigations would find it had a dead battery. A pipe ram was mispositioned. The control systems were faulty. It was like discovering your fire extinguisher is full of gasoline right when your house catches fire. At 9:58 p.m., natural gas erupted onto the rig floor. Now, natural gas is lighter than air. It rises. And when you're on an offshore rig with engines and equipment running everywhere, you've basically just filled the air with explosive fuel looking for an ignition source. The gas found one. At 9:59 p.m. and 22 seconds, there was an enormous explosion. Workers describe it as feeling like the entire rig had been hit by a freight train. The explosion was so powerful it registered on seismographs on shore as a magnitude 2.0 earthquake. The gas had ignited. The entire rig was now on fire. But it gets worse. Oil and gas were now flowing freely from the well at 12,000 barrels per day. That's over 500,000 gallons per day. The well had become an underwater volcano of crude oil, and there was no way to stop it. The fire was massive, hundreds of feet high. You could see it from 40 miles on shore. The heat was so intense that metal was melting. Workers scrambled to evacuate. Some jumped 75 feet from the rig into the ocean, which was now covered in burning oil. Imagine that decision: stay on a burning rig that might collapse, or jump into the dark ocean, which is also on fire. The Coast Guard launched a massive rescue operation. Helicopters, boats, everything they had. By 11 p.m., most workers had been evacuated, but 11 men were missing. Their names: Jason Anderson, Aaron Dale Burkeen, Donald Clark, Stephen Curtis, Roy Wyatt Kemp, Carl Kleppinger Jr., Gordon Jones, Keith Blair Manuel, Dewey Rivette, Shane Rostow, and Adam Weiss. They were fathers, husbands, sons. They had families waiting for them to come home. They were doing their jobs, following orders, trusting that the equipment would work and the safety procedures would protect them. They never had a chance. The explosion killed them instantly, or trapped them in parts of the rig that were consumed by fire. Their bodies were never recovered. They're still there, somewhere in the wreckage at the bottom of the Gulf. Remember their names, because in all the talk about money and oil and environmental damage, 11 human beings died because corporations cut corners. For 36 hours, the Deepwater Horizon burned. Coast Guard boats poured millions of gallons of water onto the inferno, but you can't put out an oil fire with water. It's like trying to stop a flood with a paper towel. On April 22nd, at approximately 10 a.m., the Deepwater Horizon sank. The rig that cost $350 million to build, that represented the pinnacle of drilling technology, that was supposed to be safe, she went down, taking her secrets and 11 men with her. But the well? 1 mile below the surface, crude oil was now gushing into the Gulf of Mexico at an estimated 12,000 to 100,000 barrels per day. Nobody knew exactly how much. Nobody knew how to stop it. And thus began the worst environmental disaster in U.S. history.
Okay, so let's talk about what happens when you have an uncontrolled oil well spewing crude into the ocean for 87 days straight. Spoiler, it's bad. Really bad. Biblical plague levels of bad. In the first hours after the rig sank, BP tried to downplay the situation. Their initial estimates said maybe 1,000 barrels a day were leaking. That's about 42,000 gallons per day, which sounds like a lot, right? It is, but it's also manageable, containable, the kind of number that doesn't make shareholders panic. Here's the thing, BP knew that number was bullshit. Internal documents that came out later showed BP engineers estimated the flow at anywhere from 12,000 to 100,000 barrels per day. That's between 504,000 and 4.2 million gallons every single day. But admitting that would have been bad for the stock price, so the official number stayed at 1,000 barrels per day for weeks. Meanwhile, satellite images were showing an oil slick the size of Jamaica forming in the Gulf. But sure, only 1,000 barrels per day. Nothing to see here, folks. The Coast Guard, the federal government, environmental scientists, they all knew BP was lying. But BP controlled the information. It was their well, their equipment, their footage from the underwater cameras. If they said 1,000 barrels, who's to say otherwise? This is corporate gaslighting on a planetary scale. That massive environmental catastrophe you can see from space? Yeah, it's not that bad, actually. Let's talk about the actual scale of the disaster.
The oil wasn't coming from one neat leak. The wellhead had ruptured in multiple places. The broken riser pipe, the pipe that had connected the rig to the well, was bent and kinked with oil gushing out of 3 different breaks. Picture a garden hose that's been run over by a lawnmower, except the water pressure is thousands of psi and the water is toxic crude oil. BP's first brilliant plan was to activate the blowout preventer remotely using underwater robots. Remember the blowout preventer? The one that didn't work when the disaster happened? Yeah, that one. Shockingly, it still didn't work. Who could have seen that coming? Plan B was something called a cofferdam or containment dome. The idea was simple: build a giant box, lower it over the leak, and funnel the oil up to a ship on the surface. They built a 100-ton concrete and steel box, deployed it with great fanfare, and it immediately failed. Turns out, when you mix cold, deep ocean water with natural gas under pressure, you get methane hydrates, basically ice crystals, that clogged the whole system. Back to the drawing board. Plan C was top kill. This involved pumping heavy drilling mud and cement down into the well to plug it from above. Think of it like trying to stop a fire hydrant by stuffing it with concrete. They pumped for 3 days, used 30,000 barrels of drilling mud. It didn't work. The pressure from the well was too strong. The mud just got blown back out. Plan D was junk shot. And yes, that's the actual technical term. They tried to plug the well by literally shooting garbage into it. Golf balls, rubber, rope, literally anything they could think of. Did I mention these are the brightest minds in the oil industry? The people we trust to safely extract fossil fuels from the Earth's crust. The junk shot didn't work either. By this point, we're in June 2010. The oil has been flowing for over a month. The slick now covers over 2,500 square miles. That's larger than the state of Delaware. Coastal communities in Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, and Florida are watching in horror as brown crude washes up on their beaches. The smell alone is overwhelming. Thick, chemical, nauseating. Wildlife is dying. Birds covered in oil, unable to fly, slowly dying from hypothermia or starvation. Sea turtles swimming through toxic sludge. Dolphins washing up dead on beaches. And BP's response? Press conferences with CEO Tony Hayward saying things like, "The Gulf of Mexico is a very big ocean. The amount of oil and dispersant we are putting into it is tiny in relation to the total water volume." Oh, and my personal favorite Tony Hayward quote, "I'd like my life back." You'd like your life back? Bro, there are 11 dead workers, thousands of people whose livelihoods have been destroyed, and millions of animals dying in toxic oil. But sure, this is rough for you. Tony Hayward, ladies and gentlemen, BP's face to the world, a man with the empathy of a pet rock and the PR instincts of a honey badger. While BP fumbled through failed containment attempts, they did have one strategy that actually worked: making the problem invisible. Enter Corasit. Corasit is a chemical dispersant. When you spray it on oil, it breaks the oil into tiny droplets that sink below the surface. The oil doesn't go away, it just becomes invisible. It's like sweeping dirt under the rug instead of actually cleaning, except the rug is the ocean and the dirt is toxic petroleum. BP dumped nearly 2 million gallons of Corasit into the Gulf. Some was sprayed on the surface, some was injected directly at the wellhead a mile underwater, something that had never been done before. The EPA told BP to find a less toxic alternative. BP said, "Nah, we're good," and kept using Corasit. Why? Because Corasit was made by Nalco, and guess who had financial ties to Nalco? If you guessed BP executives, congratulations, you understand how corporate cronyism works. Here's the fun part. Corasit is banned in the United Kingdom because it's toxic, but in the United States, spray away. The combination of oil and Corasit is more toxic than oil alone. It's like adding poison to poison and calling it a solution. Workers who were exposed to the oil Corasit mix started getting sick, respiratory problems, skin rashes, neurological issues. But hey, at least the oil was harder to see on TV, right? Out of sight, out of mind. Problem solved. Except not solved at all, because all that oil was still there, just floating invisibly through the water column, poisoning everything it touched. By mid-June, BP finally tried another containment cap. This one partially worked. They started capturing some of the oil and directing it to ships on the surface, but they were still only catching maybe 25% of the flow. The rest just kept gushing out. Beaches in multiple states were closed. The fishing industry, one of the main economic drivers, was shut down. Thousands of people were out of work. Tourism collapsed. Entire communities were economically devastated. And all the while, BP's stock price was cratering. They'd lost over $100 billion in market value. Shareholders were furious. But here's what makes this truly enraging. Even losing billions in stock value, BP was still making money. Their actual operations were still profitable. This was a company so massive, so wealthy, that they could cause the worst environmental disaster in history and still turn a profit. In July 2010, 3 months after the explosion, BP finally had a working containment cap in place. The flow was stopped, temporarily, but the well was still open. It was just capped, not sealed. The permanent fix came on September 19, 2010, when they finally completed a relief well, essentially drilling a second well that intersected the original Macondo well and allowed them to pump in cement and seal it for good. 87 days. That's how long it took to stop the flow. By the time it was done, an estimated 4.9 million barrels of oil had entered the Gulf. That's 206 million gallons. To put that in perspective, the Exxon Valdez spill, previously the worst oil spill in U.S. history, was 250,000 barrels. Deepwater Horizon was nearly 20 times larger. The oil slick at its peak covered 68,000 square miles. That's an area the size of Oklahoma. Over 1,000 miles of coastline were contaminated. Marshlands, beaches, estuaries, some of the most ecologically sensitive areas in North America were soaked in crude oil. And remember, this is just the oil we could see. Thanks to Coruscant, massive amounts of oil were suspended throughout the water column, invisible but still devastating. The true environmental cost wouldn't be known for years, because oil doesn't just kill things immediately and then disappear. It persists, it bioaccumulates, it gets into the food chain and works its way up. And that brings us to the question we started with. Why is this disaster still killing marine life in 2024? Oh, you're gonna love this answer. Or hate it. Probably hate it.
So let's talk about death. Specifically, the death of basically everything that swims, crawls, or flies in the Gulf of Mexico. In the immediate aftermath, we're talking the first few months, the visible damage was horrifying. Dead birds, dead sea turtles, dead dolphins, dead fish. The images were everywhere. Pelicans so covered in oil they looked like brown statues. Baby sea turtles struggling through toxic sludge. The official count from the immediate disaster, approximately 800,000 birds dead, 65,000 sea turtles dead, over 25,000 marine mammals injured or killed. But those are just the bodies they found and could count. The actual numbers? Almost certainly far higher. Here's why. When a bird dies from oil exposure in the middle of the ocean, it doesn't conveniently float to shore for scientists to count. It sinks, or gets eaten, or decomposes. Same with fish, dolphins, sea turtles, everything. One estimate suggested that for every oiled bird carcass found, another 30 to 50 birds died unseen. Do the math on that. We're talking millions of birds. But let's talk about the specific species and ecosystems that got absolutely devastated. The Barataria Bay stock of bottlenose dolphins was hit particularly hard. This is a population of dolphins that lives in the coastal waters of Louisiana, right in the heart of the spill zone. Studies done in 2011, just 1 year after the spill, found that nearly 50% of the dolphins studied had moderate to severe lung disease. Half. Their lungs were scarred, damaged, struggling to function. They also had abnormal stress hormone levels, suppressed immune systems, low weight, reproductive failures. In 2013,
researchers found that dolphin deaths in the area were still elevated at 4 times the normal rate. But here's where it gets really bleak. In 2024, 14 years later, the Barataria Bay dolphin population still hasn't recovered. Birth rates are low, adult dolphins are dying young, and when scientists examine dead dolphins, they're still finding evidence of oil exposure. See, oil doesn't just go away. It gets into sediments. It sits on the ocean floor. When animals stir up the sediment, foraging for food, for example, they get re-exposed to oil compounds. It's the gift that keeps on giving, if by gift you mean slow environmental poisoning that lasts for decades. The Gulf is home to 5 species of sea turtles, most of them endangered or threatened. The timing of the Deepwater Horizon spill was particularly cruel. It happened right during nesting season. Tens of thousands of sea turtle eggs were oiled. Hatchlings emerged on contaminated beaches and immediately swam into oil-covered water. Adult turtles drowned in the oil or ingested it. Kemp's Ridley sea turtles, the most endangered sea turtle species, were hit especially hard. These turtles nest almost exclusively in the Gulf of Mexico. The spill hit right in their critical habitat. Even today, Kemp's Ridley populations haven't recovered. Nesting numbers have actually declined since 2010, despite decades of conservation efforts before the spill. Scientists have found sea turtles with oil-related health problems years after the spill: heart defects, liver damage, reproductive issues. Oh boy, the fish. Where do we even start? In the immediate aftermath, there were massive fish kills, dead fish washing up on shores by the thousands. But the long-term effects are even more disturbing. Studies have found that exposure to oil during development causes severe deformities in fish. We're talking heart defects, spinal deformities, impaired swimming ability, reduced survival rates. In 2016, 6 years after the spill, scientists published studies showing that Gulf fish were still being born with heart defects at elevated rates. The oil had gotten into breeding grounds and was still affecting new generations of fish. Tuna, grouper, snapper, mahi-mahi, commercial fish species showed reduced populations and health problems. Some species still haven't recovered to pre-spill population levels. There's also something called cryptic mortality. These are fish that survive the initial oil exposure but die shortly after from organ damage. They don't wash up on beaches, they don't get counted, they just die and disappear. The Gulf is home to deep water coral reefs that are thousands of years old. These corals grow incredibly slowly. We're talking millimeters per year. They're ancient, fragile, and irreplaceable. When the oil plume passed over these reefs, it coated them. The corals died. Not some of them, massive sections of reef just died. In 2010, scientists documented coral death zones extending miles from the Macondo well site. The coral was coated in brown oil residue. The polyps, the tiny animals that make up the coral, were dead or dying. You can't fix this. You can't clean a deep water coral reef. You can't scrub the oil off. These reefs are at depths where humans can't work. All you can do is watch them die and wait for what? For them to regrow? That'll take thousands of years. But here's where it gets really insidious. Oil doesn't just kill things directly, it disrupts entire food webs. Plankton, tiny microscopic organisms that form the base of the marine food web, were exposed to oil and dispersants. Many species died off. Others had reduced reproduction rates. This affects everything. Fish eat plankton. Bigger fish eat those fish. Dolphins and turtles eat those fish. Birds eat fish. Humans eat fish. When you poison the base of the food web, the effects cascade upward, and they last for years. Studies found oil and oil-related compounds in organisms throughout the Gulf food web even years after the spill. It's in the plankton, the shrimp, the fish, the dolphins. It bioaccumulates, meaning it gets more concentrated as you go up the food chain. So when a dolphin eats a fish that ate shrimp that ate plankton that was exposed to oil, the dolphin gets a concentrated dose of toxins. And when humans eat Gulf seafood, well, we're at the top of the food chain, aren't we? Louisiana's coastal marshes are some of the most productive ecosystems on Earth. They're nurseries for fish and shrimp, habitat for birds, natural buffers against hurricanes. The oil soaked into these marshes. It killed marsh grasses. It contaminated sediments. In some areas, the marsh grass died so completely that the underlying soil eroded away. The marsh just disappeared. In 2016, scientists estimated that the spill had destroyed 1,100 square kilometers of marsh. That's over 400 square miles of critical habitat, just gone. And marshes are still dying. In areas where oil's soaked deep into the sediment, it's still there, still toxic. Marsh grasses try to grow back but struggle in the contaminated soil. The marsh edges erode. The whole ecosystem is degraded. Louisiana is already losing about a football field of coastal land every hour due to subsidence and sea level rise. The oil spill accelerated that destruction. Here's what really keeps scientists up at night. We don't know the full extent of the damage. We can count dead birds on beaches. We can track dolphin populations. But what about all the things we can't see? Deep water species that live at depths we rarely study. Microorganisms, larvae, juvenile fish, all the organisms that died without ever being counted. And then there are the sublethal effects, damage that doesn't kill immediately, but reduces fitness, reproduction, survival. A fish that lives but can't swim as well gets eaten more easily. A bird with weakened immune system is more susceptible to disease. A dolphin with lung damage has to work harder to breathe and hunt. These effects compound over time and through generations. Studies published in 2020, a full decade after the spill, were still finding elevated rates of health problems in Gulf wildlife. Dolphins with lung disease, fish with liver damage, birds with reproductive failures. In 2024, the latest research shows that some dolphin populations in the Gulf are less than half their pre-spill numbers. Sea turtle nesting is depressed. Commercial fish stocks of several species haven't recovered. This isn't a disaster that happened and ended. This is an ongoing ecological catastrophe that we've just normalized and stopped talking about. Because here's the thing that really drives me crazy. The spill stopped making headlines years ago. The 24-hour news cycle moved on. BP's stock price recovered. Most Americans probably assume the Gulf is cleaned up and back to normal. But if you're a dolphin in Barataria Bay, or a sea turtle trying to nest on the Louisiana beach, or a fish spawning near contaminated sediments, it's very much not back to normal. The oil is still there, in sediments, in food webs, in tissue samples. Mother Nature doesn't have a delete button. She doesn't get to just undo human-caused disasters. The Gulf of Mexico will carry the scars of the Deepwater Horizon spill for generations, maybe for centuries. And the absolute worst part? We're probably going to do it again. Because despite everything, offshore drilling in the Gulf continues. New wells are being drilled right now. BP is still operating in the Gulf. Lessons were supposedly learned, regulations were supposedly strengthened, but when the profit motive runs into safety concerns, which one do you think usually wins?
Okay, so we've established that the Deepwater Horizon disaster was bad, really bad, apocalyptically bad. But here's the question that should make everyone's blood boil. Was it an accident, or was it negligent homicide? Because as the investigations progressed, as the emails came out, as the testimonies piled up, a picture emerged that was so damning, so absolutely infuriating, that it makes you wonder how anyone at BP can sleep at night. Let's start with the decisions made in the weeks leading up to April 20th. The Macondo well was a problem child from the beginning. During drilling, they hit pockets of gas. The wellbore was unstable. They had to change their drilling plan multiple times. Normal procedure in these situations is to slow down, be extra cautious, maybe even abandon the well if it's too risky. BP's response? Drill faster. Internal emails from BP managers literally said things like, "Who cares? It's done. End of story. We'll probably be fine." Probably be fine.
They were gambling with human lives and environmental catastrophe on probably be fine. Let's talk about the cement job. The cement barrier at the bottom of the well, the one that's supposed to seal off the oil reservoir and prevent blowouts, was done by Halliburton. You know, that Halliburton, Dick Cheney's Halliburton. Halliburton's own tests showed that the cement mixture they were using was unstable. They communicated this to BP. BP's response? Basically, use it anyway, we're behind schedule. Halliburton later testified that they'd done the cement job exactly as BP instructed, even though they had concerns about it. On April 15th, 5 days before the explosion, a BP engineer sent an email saying the cement design was unlikely to be successful. They used it anyway. Let's talk about the centralizers. Centralizers are devices that keep the drill pipes centered in the wellbore during cementing. This ensures the cement flows evenly around the pipe and creates a solid seal. BP's engineers recommended using 21 centralizers. BP managers said no, use 6. Why? Because getting 21 centralizers to the rig would take time and cost money. One BP engineer wrote in an email, "But who cares? It's done. End of story. We'll probably be fine and we'll get a good cement job." There's that phrase again, probably be fine. Here's a fun drinking game. Every time someone at BP said probably be fine when they should have said, "Let's pause and ensure this is safe," take a shot. You'll die of alcohol poisoning before you finish reading the investigation reports. Let's talk about the negative pressure test, the test that failed twice on April 20th. The crew on the rig was confused by the test results. They called BP engineers on shore. They had a lengthy discussion about what the results meant. A reasonable interpretation? The test failed. There's a problem. Stop everything. The interpretation they went with, the test is just giving weird readings, probably because of some technical thing we don't fully understand, but it's probably fine. Probably fine. They signed off on the test and moved forward. The guy who made the call to proceed, a BP manager, wasn't even a drilling engineer. He'd been promoted into the position based on management skills, not technical expertise. This is like having your accountant approve a surgical procedure. Sure, he's smart, but maybe not the right person for this decision. After the disaster, he testified that he was just following BP's culture of, "Yes, we can do this, push forward, make it happen." Let's talk about the blowout preventer maintenance. Transocean, the company that owned the rig and the BOP, had a responsibility to maintain it. But here's the thing, BOP maintenance costs money and takes time when the rig isn't drilling and BP isn't making progress. Records showed that critical maintenance had been delayed. Inspections had been incomplete. Some components hadn't been tested properly in years. The BOP's blind shear rams, the last resort mechanism that's supposed to cut through the drill pipe and seal the well, had been modified in ways that reduced their effectiveness. When investigators recovered the BOP from the ocean floor and tested it, they found multiple failures. Dead battery in the control system, mispositioned rams, leaking hydraulic systems, programming errors. This wasn't a random equipment failure, this was systematic neglect of the most critical safety system on the entire rig. Let's talk about the organizational culture at BP. Multiple investigations by the Coast Guard, by the Justice Department, by congressional committees all reached the same conclusion, that BP had created a corporate culture that prioritized speed and cost-cutting over safety. Workers testified that they felt pressured to work faster, cut corners, ignore warning signs. Raising safety concerns was seen as being not a team player. People who pushed back on dangerous decisions were sidelined or transferred. This is what's called systemic failure. It wasn't one person making one bad decision, it was an entire organization that had normalized dangerous behavior. The Texas City refinery explosion? That was BP. The Alaska pipeline leak? That was BP. And now Deepwater? BP again. At some point, bad luck stops being an excuse. This was a pattern. Let's talk about what BP knew versus what BP said publicly. In the days after the disaster, BP executives were on TV saying, "This is unprecedented. We're doing everything we can. This is an unforeseeable accident." Meanwhile, internal BP documents showed they'd known the Macondo well was high risk. They'd known about the cement problems. They'd known the negative pressure test failed. They'd calculated potential worst-case flow rates of up to 100,000 barrels per day. but publicly they claimed 1,000 barrels. This is fraud. This is lying to the public, to regulators, to Congress about the scale of the disaster. And why? To minimize stock price damage, to minimize panic, to control the narrative. In May 2010, a month into the disaster, BP's stock price had fallen 50%. Tony Hayward, the CEO, was more concerned about reassuring shareholders than actually fixing the problem. His statement about wanting his life back, that happened while he was out on his yacht. His yacht, while people in Louisiana were watching their livelihoods destroyed, while oil soaked into marshes, while dolphins died. Tony Hayward was sailing around on his yacht complaining about the stress he was under. The level of disconnect from reality is actually stunning. In October 2010, BP released their internal investigation report. And guess what they concluded? That the disaster was caused by multiple parties: BP, Transocean, and Halliburton, and that it was a complicated technical failure that no one could have predicted. In other words, not our fault, stuff happens, moving on. Except literally everyone else who investigated, the Coast Guard, the National Academy of Engineering, the Justice Department, independent researchers, all concluded that BP's decisions were the primary cause. The Justice Department's investigation found that BP had ignored repeated warnings about the Macondo well, chose riskier, faster, cheaper options repeatedly, failed to properly test the cement barrier, misinterpreted the negative pressure test results, had inadequate maintenance procedures for critical safety equipment. And here's the kicker: they found evidence that BP had deliberately withheld information from investigators. They'd deleted emails. They'd lost records. This is obstruction of justice. This is a company trying to hide evidence of their negligence. In 2012, BP pled guilty to 14 criminal charges, 11 counts of felony manslaughter, 1 count of felony obstruction of Congress, violations of the Clean Water Act, violations of the Migratory Bird Treaty Act. They agreed to pay $4 billion in criminal fines and penalties. Individual BP employees were also charged. The 2 BP managers who were on the rig that night were charged with manslaughter. A BP executive was charged with obstruction of justice for lying to Congress about the flow rate. Most of these individual cases ended up being dismissed or resulted in light penalties, because prosecuting corporate executives is hard and rich people rarely go to jail. In 2012, BP agreed to an $18.7 billion settlement with the federal government and Gulf Coast states. This covered Clean Water Act fines, natural resource damages, and economic claims. Add it all up, the criminal fines, the civil settlements, the cleanup costs, the claims paid to businesses and individuals, and BP's total cost for Deepwater Horizon is estimated at around $65 billion. That's billion with a B. It's one of the largest corporate penalties in history. And yet, BP is still around, still operating, still profitable. In 2023, BP reported annual profits of $27.7 billion. That's in 1 year. They made back everything they lost from Deepwater Horizon and then some. Tony Hayward, the CEO who wanted his life back, he left BP with a pension worth over $17 million. He now runs a private oil company. The BP managers who made the bad decisions leading up to the explosion, most of them either retired comfortably or continued their careers in the oil industry. Nobody went to prison. 11 workers died. Millions of animals died. Ecosystems devastated. Communities destroyed. And the primary consequence for BP was they had to spend some of their enormous profits on fines and cleanup. This is the state of corporate accountability in America. You can cause the worst environmental disaster in history, kill workers through negligence, lie to Congress, obstruct justice, and the worst that happens is you pay fines that represent a fraction of your annual revenue. And this brings us to the real question: has anything actually changed?
So surely, after the worst offshore drilling disaster in history, after $65 billion in damages, after 11 deaths and countless environmental devastation, the industry learned its lesson, right? Surely we strengthened regulations, implemented strict safety protocols, maybe even reconsidered whether offshore drilling is worth the risk.
right?
Oh, you sweet summer child. In the immediate aftermath of Deepwater Horizon, there was a response. President Obama imposed a moratorium on deepwater drilling in the Gulf. New safety regulations were proposed. There was talk of major reforms. The moratorium lasted 6 months. 6 months. Oil companies complained that it was hurting the economy. Louisiana politicians, whose state had just been devastated by oil, lobbied to restart drilling because the jobs were needed. In October 2010, 6 months after the disaster, deepwater drilling resumed. New regulations did get implemented. The Bureau of Ocean Energy Management, Regulation and Enforcement, BOEM, was created to oversee offshore drilling. They required more inspections, better blowout preventers, improved safety training. These regulations were fine. Better than nothing, but not exactly revolutionary. Fast forward to 2017, the Trump administration took office with a mission to expand offshore drilling and reduce burdensome regulations. Many of the post-Deepwater Horizon safety rules were rolled back or weakened. Environmental reviews were expedited. New areas were opened for drilling. The argument? Regulations hurt business. The free market will ensure safety because companies don't want disasters. Because that worked so well the first time. Let's be clear, oil companies don't want disasters. Disasters are expensive and bad for PR. But what they want more than avoiding disasters is maximizing profit. And when you're choosing between spending money on extra safety measures or hitting your quarterly earnings targets, history has shown us what gets chosen. Today, in 2024, there are over 1,700 active offshore drilling platforms in the Gulf of Mexico. Deepwater drilling continues. New wells are being drilled in even deeper water with even higher pressures, pushing the boundaries of what's technically feasible. BP is still operating in the Gulf. So is Transocean. So is Halliburton. The companies that caused Deepwater Horizon are still doing the same work in the same place with broadly similar financial incentives. Have we developed better technology? Sure. Blowout preventers are supposedly more reliable, monitoring systems are improved, emergency response is better. But here's the thing about low probability, high consequence events. They're fine until they're not. Before Deepwater Horizon, the oil industry said blowouts couldn't happen with modern technology and safety procedures. They were wrong. Now they say the same thing about the new technology and safety procedures. See the pattern? The fundamental problem hasn't changed. We're extracting fossil fuels from increasingly extreme environments under enormous pressure, with profit-driven corporations making the safety decisions. And every time we push into deeper water, more extreme conditions, we're increasing the risk. The Gulf of Mexico isn't even the most extreme frontier anymore. Companies are now drilling in the Arctic, in waters even deeper than Macondo, in conditions that make the Gulf look easy. What happens when we have a Deepwater Horizon level disaster in the Arctic, an environment that's even more fragile, even harder to reach, even slower to recover? We'll probably find out eventually. Because here's the depressing truth. Deepwater Horizon didn't change the fundamental economics of fossil fuels. As long as oil is profitable, as long as demand exists, companies will drill. And they'll drill in increasingly risky ways because the easy oil is gone. The real lesson of Deepwater Horizon isn't about blowout preventer maintenance or cement testing. It's about the fundamental incompatibility between profit maximization and ecological safety. You can't have an economic system that rewards quarterly earnings growth above all else and expect that system to properly account for long-term environmental risks. The costs of disasters, environmental damage, health impacts, ecosystem collapse are externalities. They don't show up on corporate balance sheets. BP didn't pay the full cost of Deepwater Horizon. They paid $65 billion, but the Gulf ecosystem paid with decades of degradation. Coastal communities paid with destroyed livelihoods.
future generations will pay with depleted fisheries and contaminated environments. Those costs are real, but they're not BP's problem. Not really. And that's why nothing has fundamentally changed. We'll probably have another major offshore drilling disaster. Maybe not as big as Deepwater Horizon, maybe bigger, but it'll happen. And when it does, we'll have investigations and congressional hearings and fines and promises that this will never happen again. And then it'll happen again. Because as long as the incentive structure remains the same, as long as the profits from cutting corners exceed the costs of getting caught, rational actors in a capitalist system will cut corners. This isn't conspiracy theory, this is just basic economics. The tragedy of Deepwater Horizon isn't just that it happened, it's that it was entirely predictable, entirely preventable, and will probably be repeated.
So here we are, years after the Deepwater Horizon exploded and sank into the Gulf of Mexico. The rig is still down there, actually, over 5,000 feet below the surface, in pieces, scattered across the ocean floor. A testament to human hubris rusting in the dark. The well is permanently sealed now. The oil stopped flowing. The visible oil slicks are gone. The beaches are clean, or at least they look clean. To most people, Deepwater Horizon is history, a bad thing that happened once, like the Titanic or the Hindenburg. A tragedy, sure, but over. Except it's not over. In Louisiana's Barataria Bay, dolphin populations are still struggling. Mothers are still having miscarriages at elevated rates. Adults are still dying young from lung disease. In the marsh grass of the Louisiana coast, oil is still leaching from sediments. Fiddler crabs are still being born with deformities. The marsh is still eroding faster than it should. In the deepwater coral reefs, dead zones still exist. 1,000-year-old corals that died in 2010 are still dead and will be dead for the rest of human history. The oil didn't go away. It's still there, in the sediment, in the food web, in the tissue of every fish and dolphin and sea turtle in the Gulf. We just stopped looking. And maybe that's the most depressing thing about this whole story. Not the disaster itself. Disasters happen. Not even the corporate negligence. We've sadly come to expect that. No, the most depressing thing is how quickly we moved on. 3 months after the explosion, it was the biggest story in America. 6 months later, it was occasional news. A year later, it was old news. Now, 14 years later, most Americans probably don't think about it at all. We have the attention span of goldfish and the memory of fruit flies. Meanwhile, the ecosystem is still dying, slowly, invisibly, in ways that don't make good TV anymore. So what do we do? Option 1, we could just keep doing what we're doing. Keep drilling in the Gulf, keep pushing into deeper water, more extreme conditions, cross our fingers and hope we don't have another Deepwater Horizon. This is basically the current plan. It's working great if you're an oil executive, less great if you're a dolphin. Option 2, we could implement actually stringent regulations on offshore drilling, make companies pay the full cost of environmental damage up front through bonds or insurance, require independent safety inspections, hold executives criminally liable for negligence. This would probably reduce drilling somewhat. It would definitely increase costs. Oil companies would hate it. Politicians who take oil company donations would oppose it. So, it's not happening. Option 3, we could transition away from fossil fuels entirely, invest heavily in renewable energy, phase out offshore drilling, actually take climate change and environmental protection seriously. This is the option scientists have been screaming about for decades. It's also the option we're doing the absolute minimum on while pretending we're doing a lot. The reality is we're probably going to keep drilling until either the oil runs out or the climate catastrophe becomes so undeniable that even ExxonMobil executives can't ignore it anymore. By which point it'll be too late, but hey, quarterly earnings looked great. Here's what I want you to take away from this. Deepwater Horizon wasn't an accident.
It was the inevitable result of a system that prioritizes profit over everything else. It was corporate negligence transformed into environmental catastrophe. 11 workers died because BP decided safety protocols were too expensive. An entire ecosystem is still suffering because making oil extraction safer would have cut into the bottom line. And it's going to happen again because nothing fundamentally changed. The technology might be slightly better, the regulations might be slightly stronger, but the incentives are the same. And as long as the incentives are the same, the outcomes will be the same. So the next time you're filling up your gas tank, or buying plastic products, or using literally anything made from petroleum, which is basically everything in modern civilization, maybe take a second to think about the true cost, not just the dollar cost, the environmental cost, the cost in dead dolphins and poisoned marshes, and workers who died on a burning rig because their employer decided their lives were worth less than quarterly profits. We're complicit in this system, every one of us. We vote with our dollars and our ballots for a world powered by fossil fuels, extracted in increasingly dangerous ways, with the costs externalized onto ecosystems in future generations. Deepwater Horizon should have been a wake-up call. Instead, we hit snooze. And years later, the Gulf of Mexico is still paying the price. The disaster isn't over. It's just invisible now. Thanks for watching.